It's Nature Wins podcast, a climate adaptation journey. I'm your host, Maureen Aylward. This is Cape Ann's climate story, a storied place. Gloucester, Rockport, Essex, and Manchester by the Sea. Coastal communities of people who know their way around a storm, but were vulnerable to climate threats and working on coastal resilience. It's Nature Wins podcast, and I'm your host, Maureen Aylward. On this episode, we're talking about coastal relocation and retreat because it's really an essential conversation that we need to have in coastal regions like Cape Ann. I'm joined in the Streamography studios by Emma Gildesgame from the Nature Conservancy, Leigh, Meunier,
well done,
from CREW, and Lexi Lafferty from CREW. And CREW stands for Communities Responding to Extreme Weather. Before we get started, I just wanted to give a quick intro. Emma is a Climate Adaptation Director for the Nature Conservancy in Massachusetts. She is passionate about elevating and empowering communities most often impacted by climate change. Leigh is a project manager at Communities Responding to Extreme Weather, which is based in Somerville. She coordinates community engagement work for a number of CREW projects, including the Charles River Flood Model Project and coastal R&R events. Lexi is pursuing a master's degree in urban and environmental policy at Tufts, and she has worked on environmental justice and floodplain management and policy research. So welcome to you all.
Thank you.
And it's great to have you here on Nature Wins podcast.
Yeah, it's a pleasure.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
So excited to be here.
Yeah, me too. Before we jump into the deep end, and I mean it's a real deep end,
Yes.
I thought I'd give you a little chance to talk about your different organizations and really why we're sitting here together having the conversation. Emma, do you want to start first?
So I work for the Massachusetts chapter of Nature Conservancy, and the Nature Conservancy, or as I'll probably be referring to it in this conversation, TNC, is a global science-based organization working on biodiversity loss, climate change, and really working towards a future with a livable climate, healthy communities, and kind of thriving nature, because we know that we're all interconnected. And the work that I do specifically is really about looking at how we can help people and nature thrive together. For far too long, we've said, nature, you go over there, and people go over there, and we're going to keep you apart, and you're better off that way. And we know better now. We know that people and nature alike are better off when we all are together, and especially in the face of the impact of climate change that we're already seeing and we're going to continue to see. My work focuses on how nature can be part of the solution to keeping people safe and thriving across Massachusetts. Most of my work focuses on flooding, but not all of it.
That's great. Thanks, Emma.
Yeah.
Leigh?
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Yeah. So as you mentioned, CREW is simply an acronym standing for Communities Responding to Extreme Weather. And so when asked the question, what does CREW do? Our name kind of says exactly what we do. We help communities respond to extreme weather. And what we mean by extreme weather is, might feel obvious to some people, but is really our focus, especially in this region, is really a lot is around flooding, which is very connected to our conversation today. Also focused on extreme heat, especially because heat is often the one that's connected most around public health, community health, but that also includes storm surges, drought, right, which is just the opposite side of the cycle of flooding, and many people experience both. And the way that we really do that is focused on working with local leaders, focused on building out networks and really supporting communities and neighborhoods as much as we can in response. I think the way in which this connects to the work that we're doing now and like why this conversation is so important around coastal relocation, I'm just going to highlight what often our fellow teammate Carrie Hewlett says, which is like people are already impacted. People are already what I would actually identify as reacting often, right? Are doing their best to react to a lot of this extreme weather events, in this case, coastal flooding and sea level rise. And what CREW is really focused on is how do we empower people to be able to be more responsive, right? How do I have a sense of what's actually happening to me, to my family, to my home, to my community, and have the appropriate resources and relationships to be able to actually be responsive and not just reactive to these events that are happening to us. And yeah, so it's really great. I feel very honored to be able to be a part of this kind of work because it's also, I think, as Emma said, really connected, learning from nature. We also focus a lot on that. Weaving in the arts, thinking of like abundance in communities, what already exists in places, and how do we tap into that for when there's a crisis.
It's great. Love it. Lexi?
Yeah, so I am the Crew Community Engagements intern. I started in January. I'm also pursuing my master's at Tufts, so a lot of what I'm focusing on there is the way that social vulnerabilities impact flood vulnerability and other like extreme weather vulnerabilities as a whole. So this work has been really great, being able to combine the like human element of the environmental crisis with like what people are actually experiencing and the way policies are influencing that experience. But it's been a great team to be part of and to like weave in my like work experience and my school experience.
Great. Thank you for that. So the deep end. The deep end also needs a definition, because coastal relocation and retreat, let's define it. What for our listeners especially, like, what are we talking about here?
Yeah, so what we're talking about is another tool in the toolbox that we have to deal with flooding. So flooding is here. Those of us who live in coastal communities know that flooding is sometimes a way of life, that I hear a lot, we're tough New Englanders, we can handle some flooding. But the reality is, and we're hearing from communities across the region, that flooding is getting more and more frequent and more impactful. And so we need a bunch of different tools, ranging from the tools that we need now for this hurricane season, things like sandbags and storm barriers, to really thinking long term about how do we eliminate this risk. And so as I think about all the different suite of tools in the toolbox of dealing with flooding, there's a spectrum. And it's really beautifully written down in some both peer-reviewed academic papers and more public-facing papers by some colleagues of mine at the Nature Conservancy focused on the flood adaptation hierarchy, which looks at a spectrum from working with nature to fighting nature. And so something like protecting floodplains is a really good example of working with nature to protect people and infrastructure that we rely on and natural systems from flooding. The other far extreme is armoring shorelines, things like seawalls, things like bulkheads and other really solid built infrastructure, which is fighting water. And eventually when we fight water, we're going to not
lose.
Win. Oh, yeah. Yeah. If you go up against the ocean,
forget about it.
Yeah. We all know who's going to win in that
be
fight.
Be humbled by this ocean.
Yeah.
There's a reason why this is called Nature Wins.
Yeah.
And that's the reason.
Yeah. Nature's going to win, but if we work with nature, then we can all win together.
Right.
And so I think about this as a toolbox. There are places where we are going to need seawalls. It's just the reality. And there are places where we can say, a living shoreline that just adds a little bit of elevation will block a flood pathway and protect a whole bunch of houses for a really long time. That's a good tool for there. And there are places along our coast, and I think some of the people who live in these homes know it already, where we aren't going to be able to come up with a long-term flood prevention strategy. And the best thing that we can do is help the people who live in those unsafe homes, those flood-prone homes, help them move to safer housing, ideally in their community where they already have the social networks, the jobs, the social connections and groups, their financial networks, everything that they rely on is so place-based. So helping people move within their community before their home was decimated by a flood, and then really thinking as a community about what goes on those places that used to have homes. How do we memorialize the communities that were there? How do we create assets like spaces like open green spaces, restored marshlands, all sorts of things, so that we're not just moving away from a place, that we're moving people at risk out of harm's way, and we're adding these kind of nature-based solutions, natural structures back into those spaces that can then help protect people beyond them. And so when we talk about managed retreat, some of the tools that we talk about are buyouts, so programs that will buy somebody's house and help them move somewhere else and then restore the land afterwards. There's also tools that are related to zoning. So let's stop building more houses in the way of water where we know they're going to be flooded soon. And so there's a bunch of different tools. I also recognize, before I throw it over to some of my lovely colleagues over here, that the phrase managed retreat is terrible. And pretty much everybody, including the largest conference focused on this, recognizes that the phrase managed retreat is terrible. It takes agency away. We in kind of Western societies associate retreat with failure. It's just not a good phrase. And there's no phrase that has emerged that is universally better. And so like even the biggest managed retreat conference is now called MR, which is Mobility and Resilience. But it's still MR. And so we're going to use that phrase throughout. But as you're thinking about this and as you're talking about it with colleagues, with friends, with neighbors, think carefully about what words are necessary. So things like community relocation, visioning the future, going to higher ground, community-driven reshaping of the coast. None of them are catchy, but just wanted to put that caveat about words at the beginning.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you for that, especially around definition.
Yeah.
Leigh and Lexi?
We actually spent a lot of time, Leigh and I, at the beginning, like workshopping what to call our events in this project. And we landed on coastal R&R. And so I think some people hear and are like, oh, like rest and recovery or like rest and relaxation. And then in like the subscript, it's like resilience and relocation. But I think we want to highlight the fact that this is a form of resiliency. And it's not just like Emma said, it's like not retreating in like a negative connotation, but it's a way that we're adapting to the changing climate.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think similarly, it's like, how do we frame it? I think it's like finding a balance, because it's like we want to, there's the listening and using the language of people that we're connecting with, right? And it changes depending on where we're at. And at the same time, and this is like, made me just like wearing my like an educator hat for a minute, feeling deeply responsible for how when we're connecting with people and having the conversations about coastal relocation, like we can't then be with everybody for the next spaces they're going into, where they're going to need to then advocate for themselves. Mm-hmm. So while we want to definitely use like as commonplace language as possible and warm language that people can get behind, we also know that in a lot of spaces where people are going to have to go in and advocate for themselves, these terms are going to show up over and over again. So we also want to make sure that we aren't backing away from managed retreat, right? Some of this language, so that when people have to go into a public meeting, which already is potentially scary and nerve-wracking, and make a case for that, right? Or meet with the mayor, or testify for something, or write out a proposal, that they feel like they understand these terms well enough that they can utilize them, so I just feel like that's also a really important part of our engagement, is making sure to, when we use these terms, that I think actually do exactly what we're modeling here, right? It's like, we're going to say this term, and then let's have a conversation about the language as well, so that when you leave us, you can feel empowered to do what you need to with it. I think the one other thing I want to just say too, I think with thinking about like what is coastal relocation managed retreat, and this is where I think Crew's work is really important, is, and those networks I mentioned, is that like, we're focused here on the direct coast and meeting with communities, and while simultaneously, and this, we get outreach often from people who are looking far ahead, whether that's planners, city councilors, residents who are living in the potential like welcoming communities. I know Emma said the number one priority, if we can, is to like, because people are so connected to place, we're humans, we're connected to land, we're connecting to place. If we can remain as much as we can, great, within our community. But if we have to move, right. How are we also in dialogue with those who are living in the places where people are going to move to? And we continue to have people reaching out to us who want to be able to do it in the kindest and most, responsive way.
Yeah,
too.
I do want to come back to that topic about these welcoming communities, because that's, I think, something new for our listeners to learn more about. But Carrie's ears are probably ringing right now because we're talking about her. So we, Town Green was really happy to host one of the coastal R&R events, and that was in May. It was in May, right?
It was in May.
And it was our very first event. So thank you for being our guinea pigs.
We were psyched. We were psyched about being the guinea pig. We were really pleased to have that conversation and to bring it to Gloucester and Cape Ann. And one of the things Carrie talked about was, we're really talking about unmanaged retreat when we're talking about,
right.
and what the status quo would be, it would be an unmanaged retreat, which we're trying to avoid, and then coming up with some ideas to make sure that we know what we're going to do, so it could be more of a managed retreat. And yes, that the idea of retreat in these parts is a difficult one, because we do have a lot of areas in our communities that are vulnerable across Cape Ann, and several in particular that have been looked at in studies. And Town Green has hosted and facilitated conversations about some of them, and that specifically is Rockport's Long Beach, cottages right on the beach. So, with the seawall in front of it. So it's incredibly vulnerable. But, I would say that there's a part of us, and I would include myself in this. I grew up on, going to Long Beach, and I am just very emotional when it comes to this. And I don't want anything to change, right? None of us do.
That's deeply human.
It is. It's deeply human, and it's a deeply it's a deep feeling when we're talking about this connectedness to place. But I also think that people appreciate, given this situation that we're in around this, the chaos versus planning.
Mm.
And so I'd like for us to talk about that chaos versus planning for a minute, because I feel like that's at the heart of where we make inroads into having the conversation, to say, if we don't have this conversation, we don't do anything about it, these are the potential threats and risks. But if we do something about it and we have the conversation, these are all the benefits.
Yeah. And this is like, there is no way to talk about this well without recognizing the grief and the fact that our identities, especially places where people are choosing to live somewhere because of its proximity to the ocean, to a community that's built around loving the ocean and being near it, that those deep pieces of your identity are all tied up in this. And so acknowledging grief, acknowledging the need for memorial in all this work is absolutely essential. And planning for and having some time to say goodbye, by having these conversations now, it's giving all of us an opportunity to say, okay, things are changing, regardless of whether or not we do this planfully or we do this in response to a storm that washes these kind of cherished places and associated memories away. We have to be able to, or having time to remember, and to also think about, what do we want this to look like? What are the pieces that are so important about Long Beach? How can we hold on to those elements while also recognizing that things are changing? Because the time to prevent things from changing, unfortunately, we've baked in a whole bunch of changes from climate change. It's still really important to do a whole bunch of things to reduce the amount of carbon pollution that's going into the atmosphere and to suck out as much of it as we can. And also, we're going to see we are already seeing impacts. So we have to be able to recognize that things are changing and that we still have choices in how we move forward.
I think on the change, there's a lot of change that we don't notice is happening because it moves so slowly. So at one of our events, someone came with basically like a folder of flooding events that have happened in their family since like the 1950s. And as you got closer to like 2025, like there were more and more newspaper clippings and photos that he was able to show us. But if you ask someone, they might not say that they've noticed a lot of changes. But like Emma said, the changes are here, and they're only going to continue to get worse. And so having that conversation now gives people the ability to talk about the changes they've experienced so far and what they want to do to face the coming changes.
Yeah, so in the coastal R&R events that you've done, what are you hearing from communities that they'd like to see? What are some of the key phrases or the information that you hear from folks, that how do they want to talk about it? What are the things that they want to do? I mean, you did get some, but you've been in Winthrop, in Gloucester and Winthrop, and
and down
Taunton
in
and
Taunton River.
So we've actually we've spanned.
We've gone to the two extremes.
We've got the extremes,
the top and the I mean, I think maybe a couple things that I'll name. I think mainly connected with what Emma you were mentioning about more the visioning piece. right? So like what people and it's, I mean, I'm pausing for a second because I'm thinking about like wanting, like when we're thinking about bringing people together for these conversations, right? We want to ensure as well that we're clear about what we feel like are things that we can take action on ourselves within our community organizations. What is something that we would say is something that say these are important ideas and you know, this is what we are hopeful that like the state could do, and we can be a channel for that, or empower you as an advocate to bring these ideas forward. You know, and so just want to like when we're having these conversations, I just want to like preface that with like just wanting to be sincere and kind of where we feel like we are in this arc. Right. And that a lot of times, as we're hearing over and over again, even from leaders of organizations like the Red Cross, like organizations that are like charged with like emergency preparedness, are saying like, hey, we don't know anybody who's having these conversations yet. So even while sometimes it's happening at an individual like municipality basis, right, it's not being happened on a so often on a broader scale. So just like we're just recognizing that this is in a lot of ways the beginnings of conversations that when we're coming together with people.
Leigh, could you explain what Coastal R&R event is?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, right. So it's like Lexi already gave an excellent. What does the Coastal R&R stand for? It's essentially where crew gets to be involved in this and is very honored to be involved is bringing people together over and over again. And so what we do is we're organizing community engagement events across the coast, right, and strategically trying to find places that are a combination of maybe most vulnerable, whether it's through geography or the conditions of our lives, whether it's related to income or language and that kind of thing that makes it more challenging where we live to be able to respond as part of like in connection with community and not feel isolated in it. And so bringing people together for conversations that involve what we've already been talking about, identifying what is coastal relocation, what are the flood risks in your communities, a lot of what Emma, you mentioned about what does that visioning look like, what do we want for the land and for place as we either have to leave or we're remaining and we are living within the new conditions, but living in response to these changes that are inevitable in some respect. And then as part of that too, we make sure to weave in like we're humans coming together, right? So it is also about like breaking bread. I think I really was exciting to work with you all with Gloucester and Cape Ann and to, you know, partner with a local vendor for like a warm, nourishing meal and just offering those kinds of things as well to ensure that that conversations that can be had are as like human as possible. And then I'll just back to your question and then I'll punt it to others to be able to offer as well. What I've really loved when hearing like some of the things people are coming up with, sometimes it's things that you don't think would be the obvious idea that comes up. You know, like you mentioned about grieving and I'm like, oh, so some of the ideas aren't like, I want to make sure that there are native plants planted to best draw down carbon and make sure.
Although we have heard that.
Which is amazing too. That's so important. And at the same time, like it's celebrating like the unique, like people are going to bring ideas based on what they care about. And we want to, and so, you know, someone brought up building out a boardwalk above the area where you no longer will be able to live, but you might be able to still walk above the land and have plaques and benches and things that honor who was there, you know, and it doesn't, and still honors and doesn't disturb the land. Or someone introduced deconstruction, which if people don't know, right, it's a different way other than demolition to like, if we have to remove these 200-year-old houses that people are mourning the loss of historical places, you know, can those pieces go to another place? And how much can we make sure community is participating as actively and possible in those decisions, I would say. And also, I think the labor of it, like getting your actual hands on building that boardwalk, helping plant the plants in the wetlands, deconstructing the house and getting those pieces of those homes to other places that could use them, you know. So those are some really exciting things that I've heard.
And as a really tangible example, there was a home in Wellfleet on the Cape that was deconstructed last spring, and because of sea level rise and storms, it was basically being eroded out underneath. And before the full demolition happened, Habitat for Humanity came in and pulled the fixtures, the windows, a whole bunch of different things that, some things you can't quite pull from one house and stick into another, but a lot of things you can. And I was mentioning that to some colleagues who work on Nantucket and the Vineyard, and they're like, yeah, we've been doing that forever because it's really expensive to get stuff out to the islands. And so we've been doing that. And so there's knowledge that we can glean from people who are already doing this work and bring into places where if somebody knows that a historic structure that, has been part of the community for centuries is going to wash away in a flood, let's salvage as much of that as possible, put it somewhere else in the community before it washes out to sea.
Yeah, those are great examples, and let's come back to the conversation. So we're going to take a little break right now, and we're going to hear from our sponsor, Common Crow. We'll be back in a minute. Common Crow Natural Market, Cape Ann's one-stop shop for natural and organic food, scratch-made grab-and-go treats and meals, natural and organic wellness and beauty items, and fair trade gifts and housewares. Kind service and knowledgeable staff will help you make the best choices for you. Our passion feeds you. Okay, we're back, and thank you so much to our Nature Wins podcast sponsor, Common Crow. We're here in the Streamography studios with Emma Gildesgame, Leigh Meunier,
Well done.
and
Well
Lexi Lafferty. And we're continuing the conversation about coastal relocation and retreat and resilience. These things are all important to Cape Ann. We left the conversation in a place where we were just talking about what can be done and what a future looks like, I guess, perhaps this deconstruction of homes on the coast. Cape Ann has a rocky coast, and so we're not in the sand bars like the Cape, and yet we do have incredibly vulnerable areas. One of the things that have come up in our conversations up here is that, picking up and moving, if that was an option. But we don't have a lot of land to go to. And there's a housing crisis. And, coming back to these welcoming communities, and I think that's the hardest thing for people to wrap their heads around up here is that, one, we're angry, right? We're angry that this is happening to us. We love our place. Two, fear of the unknown, and it's better to literally put our heads in the sand and maybe not deal with this issue because it's just a little bit too much. And three, there are people really, truly understanding that their homes are at risk. They might be ready for a buyout. We've had some other conversations about buyout, but it's really, I think it's a difficult one to have up here. So I don't know, what are you hearing from other communities? Because I'm curious about that. And are they feeling the same way? And have you found a way in to kind of unlock the fear so that the conversation is beginning to flow? Because each municipality up here is a little different too.
Well, I think the bottom line is not shying from that anger, not shying from that fear. There is reason to be angry because this was avoidable if we had taken action on climate earlier. There is reason to be fearful. We've been really lucky over the last several decades and we haven't had a direct hurricane hit. We did see the waves and the riptides and the erosion. I know erosion isn't as big of a concern up here, but it's definitely a concern across the coast. Mm-hmm. We know that there's reason for fear. And I think the best way to shut people down is to dismiss that anger and that fear. And the best way to move through that is to feel and sit with the anger and the fear. I am so sorry to tell you that we've figured out that the best way to do that is ice cream. We figured that out after the Town Green event. The rest of the events have had ice cream. But
really, you found out that this was the key after the Town Green event.
Yeah, I'm so sorry. But no, I'm so sorry. I heard you had good cookies though.
That's true. They were,
Yeah, they were good.
excellent.
But in all seriousness, what Leigh was talking about earlier about breaking bread together, about making spaces where it's not just come and bring your planning brain, where it's come and share your experiences. I mean, some of the communities that we've talked to, there's a handful of homeowners who are coming to their municipalities, to consultants working on resiliency plans and saying, my house has flooded every other year for the last 10 years. I have lost cars. My basement is flooded repeatedly. I want out, but I don't feel good about selling my house to somebody else where they're just going to get flooded. And I can't just get up and move because all of my money is tied up in my house. Like these are real challenges that people are facing. And so my entryway into these conversations come from people asking for help. Mm-hmm. And we're seeing people asking for help. And we're also seeing the state of Massachusetts respond to that. In the Resilient Coasts Plan that is out as draft now, it should be out summer 2025 is what I've heard for the final version, but it recognizes that managed retreat is a tool that the state needs to help with. Mm-hmm. That the state needs to provide resources for. Also, at some point in the near future, they'll be announcing the successful contractor who will be hired. Not sure when that's supposed to be, but also within the next several months, probably, to do a statewide assessment of what could a buyout program look like for people facing both inland and coastal flooding. Coastal flooding, we've been relatively lucky, but a lot of our fellow Massachusetts residents, a lot of farmers got hit really, really hard by Connecticut River flooding. And so how do we think about this? And so hopefully we'll have more support from the state because I think that what makes things less scary is to start to see the way out, start to see what the future can look like. It's really hard to make change if you can't see it. Because when you're scared, it's easier to say, okay, no, let's go back to the way things were. Let's undo. Mm-hmm. Like, I want to go back. Let's go back. And we're seeing that in a lot of places, in a lot of ways right now. And the only way forward is to help collaboratively paint a picture of here's what we know. What can the future be? And Leigh, I just saw you write down My Coast on your piece of paper. Do you want to talk about how My Coast can help with that visioning of the problem and potential solutions?
Yeah. It also mentioned like how people can document. I know that My Coast is
that's exactly
to document it, but they can also do that on their own as well.
Sure. I mean, I think Lexi, you just gave an example earlier of someone who's been doing that for years, and so I just want to lift that up as a really powerful example and why it's also really important. Like even in our most recent team meetings about this project will continue through June of 2026. So like opportunities to connect with people who have that longevity in communities to, who had not just since My Coast appeared a few years ago and it's an app, right? That's one way. But that hasn't been around for that long yet. Yeah. But we want to, so I think it's a combination. There's My Coast, which is simply a website, and you don't need a smartphone to do it. Anybody could go use either their smartphone or a camera, go out and document the king tides, the flooding that they're seeing in their communities, and then upload it on the website, which it's a simple online search of My Coast, Massachusetts, and it will take you there.
Mm-hmm. mycoast.org/MA.
There it is. And that's the actual website. But that's it, right? It's one way to document. I think one of the reasons that that mechanism is so important is because it's not just you're documenting. It's, I think, two other things. One, it then is that information is going directly to the state. It's going directly to a place where local planners and others can access it and can do something. So if people are like, how do I participate in this? Right, that's one way that we can do that. And then I'd say flip that. It's also, all those photos are all accessible to all of us. So if you then need to make a case, not just for your own home, but on behalf of your neighborhood or your community, you can go in and find those photos. And I think I do want to just though come back and give a nod though to like what some of the people like Lexi had mentioned, are coming in with like folders of like a generation. And so it's like wanting to do both, like still make sure like at our events we are, I don't know, maybe that's even something for us to prioritize or to invite people to do is to bring, like, hey, are you an older person in your community or part of a family that's just generationally has has seen the changes. We especially want to invite you in because you've been bearing witness to change of place over time in places where it might have been moving slowly and others might not know it so much. So that's like, and I think in some ways, it's back to your question about anger, how we respond to it. A lot of what we want to do when we bring people together, and our events are evolving over time too. Like every time we meet people like you or in Town Green and others who have these tools, we weave them into the next event. Right now at all of our events, I'm like, who is the local medical reserve corps, the local community emergency response team rep? Because I think a lot of times people, when we're angry, it's because we also feel like we can't do anything about it or we're not being heard or valued. And so those are things we want to make sure we're addressing. And we can do that in a lot of ways. And one way is just connecting people with groups where they can get trained and or bring their own training or skills, and then show up for communities, when they're in crisis.
I also think there is a lot of fear and anger in every single community we've been in. And it's not just in Cape Ann. But I also think by the time we get to the end of our events, people feel a lot more connected. There's this idea that you're kind of alone during this, especially since homeownership is so siloed from your neighbor, that like when you flood, you like think, oh, I hope my neighbor's not flooding, but you're not really thinking about what their recovery process is like. But when you come to these events and we give out ice cream and people stand and mingle for an hour or so after the event, they're sharing these experiences, and it takes away a lot of the fear by like talking about and knowing that you have a community who feels the same way and knowing that you have like path forward with other people.
And also making space for people to have different opinions within a community and normalizing that, because people will have different connections. And I think one of the pieces of having these conversations now is when you don't talk about it, you can't do anything about it. When you don't have these conversations, which for a long time, this was like the most taboo piece of climate. It still is quite taboo.
It still is. Yeah.
And so the work that we're doing, that we're talking about with these community dinners and ice cream socials, and we're popping up and tabling at events, and we're talking to as many people as we can about this, is to start planting seeds of, here is a tool that is still being shaped. And just to kind of take a half step back and do a bigger picture, the work that we're doing with Crew is part of a larger program funded by the Massachusetts Office of Coastal Zone Management that basically is laying the groundwork to really think about what this can look like in Massachusetts. And so we are working with the Urban Harbors Institute at UMass Boston, and the UMass Amherst Cooperative Extension has a program called the Massachusetts Ecosystem Climate Adaptation Network, or MassECAN.
Well done.
And we've mentioned Carrie Hewlett of CH Consulting, who's been a really important partner on this as well. And in addition to hearing from communities across Massachusetts about their thoughts on this, we're also working with practitioners. So the people who do climate resilience planning, the people who advocate for climate resilience from nonprofits, people from community-based organizations, and helping build those professional networks of people who, when a resident comes to them and says, my house, like I just had my car totaled by a king tide for like the third time in 6 years. Like, I cannot deal with this anymore. You have to fix it for me, municipal staff person. That they know that they can email the listserv, reach out to people who've thought about this before, that there's a community, because this idea of we're not alone in this, that we're not alone in this in Massachusetts. New Jersey has a flood buyout program that's been going for decades. There's different programs in Rhode Island. There's all sorts of things that we can be learning from. So I know Massachusetts loves being first in all sorts of things. And we can be early. We can still be the innovators. There's room for growth and innovation here, but we aren't doing this alone. And part of this whole bigger picture is, how can we learn from others? So one of the big things that I'm really excited about is in the next week or two, we're going to have our resource database going live, which is a whole bunch of information about managed retreat, about flood resilience, about case studies of places where this has happened. And I think the more we can share and the more that we understand what this can look like on the ground, the better. Because there are some places, there is a handful of places in the world. There's a couple in the Mississippi Delta where like literally whole communities have picked up and moved. Those are rare. That's not what we're talking about here in Massachusetts, because we've got hills. And because we have hills, we're talking about a handful of homes. And in some communities, it's more, in some it's less. But that also opens us up to, we know there's a housing crisis. We know that there's a transit crisis. I just heard on BUR a couple days ago that Boston has the 4th worst traffic in the world, and I thought that was silly. And then we drove up here from Somerville on a Monday afternoon at like 3 p.m. and
it took you a lot longer.
it took us way longer than Google thought.
Yeah.
But the idea of how do we work together across all these silos to figure out how to solve this. I don't know how to solve housing crisis. I'm an environmental scientist who focuses on water. Like, I don't know how to solve these problems. And so I have to work with people who work on housing, who work on transit, who work on utility infrastructure, because what we're talking about is changing the way that we think about where and how we live. And who am I to know all those things? None of us know all those things. It's why we're all working together.
Yeah, we need to surround ourselves with people who know all these different things, because I mean, unless you're an absolute genius and can do all those,
Nobody
Genius
can do
is
it
held by a community.
genius.
Yeah.
That's not me. I didn't come up with that. That's not me. That is. I don't. Yeah. May I offer a couple other things?
Yeah,
So it just made me think of it when you're talking about practitioners. I think so. One of the things we think about when we are putting together these events, clearly it's resident focused. While one of what we also want to do there is like weave in as many of these tools as possible so that both residents themselves and then any practitioners, local planners who we are also, and invite them in, right? So that they also can witness and potentially practice some of these things that they might feel unpracticed in. Like how, when someone's going to come to me and be angry, exhibit anger. Not just say I have anger because something needs to change, but are exhibiting anger towards them. You know, I've heard that quite a bit. You know, and then there's an aversion, and you don't want to engage with communities because you're now also afraid or feel unskilled. And so, you know, we think about how we, with our events, are also weaving some of those things in ways that help back to your question about like address the anger. And also are very obviously tools that people can take with them. And a couple examples, I just want to name them here in case, because this is a place for learning, right?
Yep.
So some things we think about is we know people are going to come in angry, frustrated. And so but these are planned events. So we're like, for this, in these kinds of instances, when hey planners, if you're going to you're going to be bringing people together a month from now, there are things you can be doing in advance to help gather information so that when people come together, you can say, hey, through that survey, through those things in advance, we got a sense from you of like what your frustrations might already be. Can we show how we're already listening?
Yeah, so you think surveys are one of the
just ways. How do we can reach people in advance often to ask, what are the challenges? What are the things, frustrations and things that are maybe bringing you to this event? So people have had some space to already start to explore it, and then we can say start off before people, or when people come into the event, offer posters, offer places for people to, in small groups, to go over and contemplate, reflect on, that kind of thing, so that when we're going to come and bring everyone together for a large conversation, like I said, we can share what we've heard and say, does that line up? What else? And so it's being added to in a constructive way. So it's really about like channeling it. And then I think, again, really coming back to this, like offering like other things that people can then feel, not just around the not being heard or people aren't responsive to my needs, but also like I said, feeling like there's things I want to be able to do, but I don't have channels for, being active. Like I want to be more involved in the response too.
Yeah,
and valued in that way. Valued as a person who can be part of the response.
Yeah. And that's, I think, the key, because I think a survey is great if you can take the results, say, here's what we heard from you, here's what we did, and also sometimes say, we heard this, we're not able to actually act on this piece because unfortunately we don't control A, B, or C variable. But really being able to be responsive, because it is so hard to maintain anger, fear, any of that when you're in a community with people, when the people who do have power can say, I hear you, here's the action that I'm taking on that, and then they actually take that action.
Yeah. So a question in terms of, the communicator on some of this. We're sitting here as members of community-based organizations, essentially, nonprofits. And then the municipalities are really the ones that are driving in zoning and other issues related to having the conversation. So, from the municipality standpoint, have you talked to other municipal leaders, and what are they saying? I'm curious as to where they're landing.
There's no one place where they're landing, but we have talked to a ton of community leaders. We hosted the first proactive coastal relocation workshop, which all of us were at
We were
back in June. Another example of feed the people and they'll be happy.
Yeah.
Yes.
There's a lot of food.
It was
Really
great.
good food. Yeah.
You put me in charge of an event and there'll be too much food. But anyway, we had about a third of the people at that event were municipal staff. And then we realized that we scheduled it for right before all the state grants were due. And so everybody was scrambling. So there was a bunch of municipal staff who couldn't make it. So we know that municipal staff are interested in this. And there's a range. There's people who say, I know that my community probably needs this, and there is no way for me to make the case to my town manager. We have 4 square miles. It's all coastal. There's nowhere for us to go. But we know that we need help. There's people who say, we want a buyout as soon as you can get us a buyout program. There's people everywhere in between. And so one of the really powerful things that I've seen in just the side conversations over lunch at the workshop and via the messages that go up to the network's listserv is, okay, here's the challenge I'm facing in communicating this to my city council, to my boss, to my constituents. Has anybody else solved this? And people are coming back and saying, I sort of got there. Let's talk. Or like, yeah, here's a report of how we did this. And so really cross municipal learning is really important, especially in a state like Massachusetts, where we have 78 coastal municipalities. And anybody who's lived in other states outside New England knows that many of them have counties with full planning authority, and decisions are made at a much larger scale than our home rule state, which means that all of our 78 coastal municipalities are doing this on their own. And there's going to be 98 coastal municipalities by the end of the century. And so
And that's
these
because
networks.
of inland flooding.
The coastal
Riverine.
municipalities, the increase in coastal municipalities is because of coastal impacts pushing up rivers. And so those communities will actually be dealing with saltwater impacts within the next 50 plus years. And so it's actually not even counting all the inland and riverine flooding. So it's places actually like right now, Taunton isn't counted as coastal, but it will be.
And places like Lawrence.
Lawrence, I don't know if Lawrence is officially one of them, but I think definitely going up the Merrimack, there's more that become, but I don't know if it's as far up as Lawrence. Although there aren't dams up till there, so probably. Like Lawrence is the end. Sorry, this is a tangent. Lawrence is the end of the the coastal flood risk model. But I think that there are municipalities who are eager, who are saying, okay, when there's a buyout program, we want to be the pilot. How do we become the pilot? Yeah. And my answer is, we don't have a buyout program, but hopefully the pilot will tell us how we can do it and also how you can be a pilot.
I mean, it's still happening, right? So, we will have some kind of guidance from the Resilient Coast Initiative with the buyout in Massachusetts. That's something I think to look forward to see what they're going to find out and to see what they're going to be recommending.
Yeah.
So, yeah, we do have that to look forward to. And we have a short amount of time left. So I wanted to talk about social cohesion, social resilience, and the reason I think that we're all doing what we're doing is to bring people together, to have the conversations of what we need to address around climate threats, and the strengthening of that social bonds between us and neighborhoods and communities. I'm just bringing that up because I feel like this is one way forward, and I'm quite interested in doing that. Town Green's working on a new project going into neighborhoods called the Neighborhood Resiliency Project. So we are building the social cohesion through emergency preparedness. And that's why Crew and Town Green are like sister organizations,
right.
I will say.
Yeah.
um, but just some thoughts about building this social resilience and just some, yeah. So what are you thinking? Leigh?
I don't know, do you want
Lexi?
to, just for more voices and stuff, I don't know if you have any. Feel free to.
Yeah, I think a lot of it comes down to like what we were talking about earlier of just bringing people together and allowing people to share where their experiences are and what assets and vulnerabilities they're facing and have. So one of the things that we do at our events is an asset and vulnerability mapping station where people can showcase areas in their community that are at risk for flooding, but they also can identify places and people and things that make them feel more secure and supported. So for example, at some of our events, someone will talk about how they're not really at risk for flooding because they're uphill. But then it also gives us the opportunity to say, like, but how can you help the people who are downhill from you? And how can you support other people in your community? At one of our events, two women were talking and they made plans to carpool to work because they were both complaining about the traffic and like issues around driving when flooding happens. But it's like creating the conversations and the spaces for social, like, community to develop and for people to like find support in each other that they wouldn't have had otherwise. I don't know if Leigh
Yeah.
or Emma.
Well, one thing that you had. Was it?
you.
Yeah. Well, I just maybe one thing I just want to give it a nod also to Lexi, what you just said. Like the word solidarity comes to mind, and one of the like most powerful ways that we can be in solidarity is through shared experience, right? And so as much as I don't necessarily want to like foster like now like something that is like a negative spiral, right? It's like still wanting to, but to be, for me to be able to be there and trusted to witness. I mean, when you're saying these two people are saying they're having a conversation, they're having a conversation like with you there, which means there's also a trust that they can sit there and share an emotional, right, response, some frustration and whatnot. And that you're not going to try to shut it down. I think that's one of like, when I think about it, is just like, that's one way that social cohesion can happen, right? It's through solidarity. And it's going to be through sharing quite often frustrating or stressful or crisis experiences with each other. And so just for us as the people who are holding the spaces, ensuring that I don't allow my discomfort with people, that like social cohesion is happening in front of me and I want to help that as much as possible. But I also just like be mindful of my own, if the way people are doing isn't exactly what I would have wanted, I don't try to then control it, you know?
Right. Yeah.
I would want to.
It's organic.
Right. It might be me offering like a question or something, like show that I'm listening and want to be showing curiosity to what is happening organically right in front of me. And then I just want to, and it's just lifting up. It's less a practice and more, you mentioned the importance of social cohesion. But part of why Crew is so focused on that is that, I mean, similar to heat, right? Like isolate, and it goes hand in hand, like isolation, it can be deadly. I mean, it's connected to like mental deterioration, physical deterioration, spiritual deterioration. And so that like has like long-term impacts. And then also when there's a crisis, there's like study after study that shows in communities, it's not just about income and I have the money to get out of here. It's the people who knew who their neighbors were, right? That came out on the other side stronger, more connected, and survived and maybe even thrived, you know, through the crisis. And I just want to name too, I think that's one of the things for planners here, you know, remembering like when we're bringing people together, when we're talking about managed retreat, I like being sensitive to like, I don't want to just say like unmanaged retreat is like what's already happening. And then that means everything that's happening right now isn't good stuff. It's really like how often I've been in conversations with people at these events where they're lifting up, you know, look, in our neighborhood, there's a lady down the street who's at the higher end of the street who like that's where people go. She just invites everybody over for a hot meal and like throw sleeping bags on the ground and we just stay there, you know? And so I'm like, who is, in a way that still honors confidentiality and privacy, but that's unmanaged retreat, and that it's not something that is like scaled up and you know, brought to the broader community.
Well, this is what neighbors do for each other.
Those are the things.
If they know each other.
Right.
And they have to
but so
come
like
together.
that's
Yeah.
already happening.
Yeah.
So like unmanaged retreat is really, for us, a lot of the time, not just saying no to things that are negative. It's negative. Those are incredible things that are already happening. And how can we build on that wisdom, build on those incredible relationships, and, and get funding for it and build out a larger program so the whole neighborhood can benefit, or yeah.
Yeah. Well, I think just a great example of the social cohesion and getting to know your neighbors is there's a town where we haven't done an event yet, but I was talking to their municipal staff and they was like, yeah, there's, this stretch of homes right near the water that on the days where there's high tides, they all need to move their cars. And there isn't enough parking in the neighborhood. And so there is a text thread where they're all on the text thread and they all coordinate to move their cars so they can get their cars out of the floodplain. And that's not something that happens from an official alert. That's not something that happens from the top down. That is grassroots community risk prevention. And this is where we see after disasters, neighbors coming out and helping each other. And so people ask, okay, what can I do now? And one of the most fun options, so it's like, have a emergency preparedness plan, post things to My Coast so that we know what's happening across the coast because nobody knows what's happening on the ground, like the people who live there. And also throw a block party.
Yeah.
Like it's the end of summer, but it's not really the end of the warm outside season. So throw a block party, get to know your neighbors. And if you want to put out some resilience and kind of emergency preparedness resources while you're at it, great. But just by exchanging numbers with your neighbors, you have taken such a huge step in now when you're walking down the street and you see them walking their dog, you'll know their names in addition to their dog's names.
Well, that's one of the things the Neighborhood Resiliency Project is doing. We're doing the neighborhood sessions. So I'm talking to folks at tabling events, and I was like, do you want to invite us to your backyard, to your block party, to your living room, to your book club? And, we'll do small group sessions, and then and that's really important because we're after that. We're after neighbors coming together to talk to neighbors, to get to know each other, to do some asset mapping, to have the conversations about the vulnerabilities in the neighborhoods. And we're starting in the environmental justice areas of Gloucester. And that's key. It's just really getting people out to talk to one another. It doesn't matter how many people. And we're also doing one-on-one drop-in sessions in the 4, potentially 5 communities that would include Ipswich with Cape Ann. So I'm so glad to hear you say that because we're trying to build on that idea of that social connectedness, that neighbors need to know neighbors. Like even on my street, there's a lot of people up the hill that I don't know them. And so I have to hold a block party.
Me too.
May I offer something else on that too? Because I'm thinking also who's most prone, right? Like I'll say to isolation, but I'm how do I say this? I say most prone to isolation, but it's not necessarily because of I can't get to the block part, or there's something that's more like a barrier in that way. I just think about you mentioned about talking, and sometimes for people that's not the way by which they're going to feel most, is not the way in for getting connected to the community. Mm-hmm. That's what I mean. It's going to be through something active. And so some people might not either come to the block party or want to engage in things that are social by way of verbal exchange. So that's another thing I want to just lift up because that's something else that crew thinks about a lot is labor, active, when we are doing something together,
activities.
Right? Yeah. Then even, Emma, you're mentioning about the visioning. So people might not want to necessarily be involved in the parts of it that are about the planning or the verbal parts, but could be the ones that are helping to do the transformation of the land.
So that's a good point. Some kind of physical activity or the way that the community comes together to build a playground sometimes is just a really wonderful opportunity.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I'm sorry to say we're out of time.
Mm.
It goes fast. Emma, Leigh, and Lexi, thank you so much for being on Nature Winds podcast, and thank you all for listening. Thanks to Common Crow for our sponsor, and everybody here at Streamography Studios. We love being here, and it's really good to be back. For more information on the topics and resources that we mentioned, you can go to Town Green's website, town-green.org. You can also find us on Town Green's YouTube channel, which is just Google Town Green YouTube and it'll come up. I did that today. And check us out on Nature Winds Spotify page, and subscribe on our YouTube, subscribe on our Spotify page. We are really so thrilled to be able to provide these kinds of topics and conversation here for Cape Ann. And so I'm Maureen Aylward, your host, and we'll talk to you next time. Thanks for listening. Thanks for listening to Nature Winds Podcast, a climate adaptation journey. Follow Nature Winds on Town Green social platforms, #TownGreenInc. Listen to Nature Winds on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and Google Podcasts. You can find us on Instagram, LinkedIn, Facebook, and YouTube. Visit towngreen2025.org to subscribe to our newsletter and learn more about Town Green.